I'm going to kick us off today with a very short presentation about my experience supporting grassroots communities with web archiving activities. So as Garth said, I'm currently in post as lecturer in digital information and curatorial practice in the iSchool at Manchester Met University. I'm also just finishing up a PhD at UCL in information studies, and I come from a background in archival practice. I probably wouldn't place myself completely as an expert in web archiving, so in many ways I'm as much here to learn as I am to present today, so I'm really looking forward to hearing from everyone else as we go on. But I am a professional who has done some work in this field. I've generally, in my background in practice, been very focused around supporting grassroots communities of various types in archival practice. And most recently that has taken the shape of disseminating and sharing skills and knowledge about web archiving. So this presentation is just a bit of an anecdotal account about my experiences doing this across the last couple of years. And I hope that kind of by kicking off today, my thoughts will encourage more folks to get involved in this sort of work, especially if you feel a bit intimidated by it, because I certainly did to start off with. There's a lot of jargon that I still don't understand and I'm still getting to grips with, but you know, I hope by kind of sharing my experiences it will encourage others to kind of, you know, give it a go, basically, which I think is, you know, a great focus for this event as well. So to just give you a bit of background as to how I ended up doing work in this area. So as I said, over the last 3 and a bit years, I've been working on a PhD at UCL. And this explores how DIY music communities, so how grassroots music communities are documented and archived. And this project, which is generally focused around working with currently active communities, so those doing work right now. And one of my objectives is to understand the issues encountered in record keeping in community contexts. And my research identified a massive cluster of issues, particularly around born digital and web information. And this included, for instance, a lack of knowledge and skills about how to deal with either born digital or web heritage within scenes, information becoming inaccessible at a rapid pace. So the image on the right is one of the illustrations from my PhD, which, you know, talks about these experiences of kind of encountering errors wherever you go, which is no doubt familiar to lots of us. And this is an issue, especially considering that a lot of the communities I'm working with are predominantly using digital platforms for almost all of their organizing and communication functions now. And at the same time, a lot of those digital information, digital platforms, particularly social media platforms, are deleting a lot of their information. So this kind of cluster leaves people feeling very helpless and unable to kind of hold on to anything. So as my project was or is action and practice led as much as it is theoretical, I wanted to find ways to disseminate the knowledge and skills I had from my background in practice within the community as a way to counter some of these feelings of helplessness and kind of equip people with some skills. And I should say also that, you know, this also came out as what people wanted was, you know, not so much for other people to take on that work, but for them to kind of be given the tools to deal with some of this in their own community context. So as part of this, in 2020, I delivered a series of online workshops that were designed to share skills and knowledge that I'd gained through previous training, through my research and through archival practice. I delivered these on Zoom. I think there were about 8 in total, 8 workshops. And I was interested in testing out running training on a sliding scale basis. So I set up tickets with a suggested donation between £0 and £10, with the idea that some of these, that they would be accessible to either people working in funded organisations and those that were interested on an individual level. So I shared these online via social media and listservs, and broadly pitched it as a complete basic intro to web archiving. So I made it very clear that people who came to the workshop didn't have to have had any professional or voluntary experience, just an interest was all that was important. So the general format for these workshops was they were 2 hours long. They used a mixture of presentations, breakout discussions, and demonstrations. So I imagine, you know, quite similar to what we'll be doing over the course of this event as well. And I placed a lot of emphasis, I do in teaching practice in general, on using language in the most accessible way possible. So I minimized the amount of jargon that I used, and when I did use specific terms, I explained them in quite a lot of detail. The kind of interactive focus of the space also created a lot of opportunity for people to make connections through discussions, to share issues. And then the rest of the workshop was focused around a demo of one particular tool. So the tool for this session was Conifer, which I think someone else is speaking about later today, perhaps, which is an open source tool. It's free, it's low cost, free or low cost depending on the options available. So I chose to effectively demonstrate this and record that demonstration so that people also afterwards had a copy of the demo and could play around with the tool at their own pace. So these workshops were, yeah, more successful than I anticipated. I ran them for about, I think each one had 30 attendees, or perhaps some of the smaller ones, the first ones might have had a slightly smaller capacity, but the total amount of people who attended were over, I think the number I've got is over 140 people attending over all of the iterations. What I think was particularly successful about these workshops was the kind of mix of people, and this was in, you know, the first year of the pandemic, when I think, you know, the potential of online tools for sharing information was quite new, and it brought together people from certainly from activist groups across the world, and, you know, the interest in the event was incredibly surprising and very fulfilling for me personally. It also included a lot of information sector workers from across the UK, but also internationally. And people from this context had kind of booked onto these workshops because they wanted to, or they were struggling to access affordable training in digital preservation and web archiving. So it also, as a sort of side effect, made me think a lot about, you know, how we get access to these skills in general, because you know, it seemed like in many ways, you know, wanting access to knowledge and skills was shared across, you know, both activist groups that attended and the information workers. And so, you know, it was very successful. It proved to me that, you know, using these online spaces to do this sort of work and to share knowledge and skills is, you know, an affordable and accessible way to do this work. And it also, for me, stressed the interest in this from, you know, grassroots communities, because, you know, certainly at the point of setting them up, I think friends of mine, you know, thought I was going to be running some very quiet workshops effectively, and what happened in the end was, you know, the complete opposite. So it showed to me that there's a real interest in events like this, which enable that transfer of knowledge and skills from professionals into communities, particularly ones that are hosted by, I guess, you know, me as someone who has, you know, a foot in both of these spaces, it provided a really great way to kind of capitalize on that experience and position and have a positive impact. So I'm currently looking, now I'm in post in a permanent academic job, how to develop this more, and, you know, just some sort of initial thoughts of you know, how this could progress, but also the directions that I've taken and collectives that I've been working with have taken since the event. So yeah, I'm looking at how, you know, this one sort of event could be scaled up in different ways, how it could take on different forms, because this was, as I said, a very basic, simple intro to one tool, and the interest suggests that, you know, there is potential there. The other thing that has happened since then is I've been involved in a collective called Recording It Ourselves that are focused around the intersection of grassroots communities and information practices. And we hosted, similarly, an online event that was more talk-led earlier this year. And that was very successful again, and demonstrated, you know, the sort of need for these events. So I'm going to stop talking now, as someone, you know, I've just shared some thoughts, I guess, about why it's important to be doing this work. I think, you know, in concluding on this, I know it's incredibly important for archive sector workers to be building this skill set. But in doing this work with communities, you know, for me, that knowledge becomes heightened because, you know, as archive sector workers, we need this skill set so we can manage our own collections, but we also need it so we can continue to empower communities to do their own heritage work as well. And yeah, as I said, this experience of running this also made me reflect about the accessibility of training in this area, because it, you know, these events effectively brought people together due to a lack of affordable training at that point in time. And using online formats such as this today obviously takes away a lot of the costs that training courses normally require in terms of physical spaces. So I'd love to see more work in this area. And just finally, I think one of the biggest successes from this series was also due to, you know, marketing this event completely outside of information professional networks as well as within. So, you know, thinking about how we market and position and engage different audiences, I guess. So yeah, thank you all for having me, and I look forward to hearing from the Q&A in a little bit, perhaps.